The galaxy had always ruled itself by distance. Empires rose not because they were just or wise or even particularly intelligent, but because they were old. Age meant reach. Reach meant fleets. Fleets meant law. Across tens of thousands of star systems, power flowed outward from ancient cores like gravity, bending younger civilizations into quiet obedience long before they could imagine resistance. Species learned their place early or were removed before they learned anything at all. Humanity was late. Humanity was young. Humanity was loud. From the moment Earth's first faster-than-light signature rippled through the interstellar medium, it set off alarms older than human civilization itself. Observatories embedded in dead moons noticed the distortion. Listening arrays hidden inside stellar coronas recorded the unmistakable proof of a species that had not asked permission. Autonomous herald probes, some older than the human concept of history, adjusted their trajectories toward a small yellow star on the fringe of mapped space. The galaxy noticed, and the galaxy disapproved. At first, humanity never knew. That ignorance was not a failure of intelligence, but a consequence of scale. Humans were still arguing over orbital jurisdictions, over who owned the rights to asteroids and moons, over whether expansion should be cautious or bold. Their colonies were fragile arcs of metal and hope clinging to unfamiliar worlds. Their fleets were defensive, modular, and designed around the assumption that space was empty and uncaring. It was not empty. It was watching. The first contact did not come with greetings or translation matrices. It arrived as an ultimatum encoded in radiation and math, broadcast across every human settlement simultaneously. The message carried authority refined by millions of conquered worlds. It did not threaten, it informed. Humanity had violated sovereign expansion limits. Humanity had failed to petition recognized galactic authorities. Humanity was classified as a disruptive emergent species. Compliance would be enforced. Across Earth, across Mars, across the scattered habitats of the Belt, people watched their skies fill with symbols they did not recognize but instinctively understood as judgment. The stars themselves seemed to rearrange as alien vessels decelerated into visible space, not with speed but with certainty. They were enormous, elegant, and terrifyingly quiet. Structures grown rather than built, curved and seamless, radiating power without exhaust or flame. The galactic rulers had arrived. They were not a single empire, but a convergence of the oldest surviving powers, a council of dominions that had long ago learned the efficiency of collective suppression. They did not war with one another anymore. They only warred downward. To them, humanity was not an equal or even an enemy. Humanity was a variable to be corrected. The rulers believed in precedent. Every species that reached the stars too quickly was either absorbed, shackled, or erased. Innovation without oversight led to chaos. Independence led to fragmentation. Fragmentation led to war. War disrupted trade lanes, energy flows, and the delicate equilibrium of power that the rulers had curated for eons. Humanity represented all of those risks, wrapped in one volatile package. What the rulers failed to understand, what no ancient empire ever truly grasped, was what it meant to be born on a world that tried to kill its children every day. Earth had never been gentle. It had starved, drowned, burned, frozen, shaken, and poisoned its dominant species for hundreds of thousands of years. Humanity had survived predators with teeth, diseases without cures, climates that shifted without warning, and rival tribes that refused to surrender. Every inch of progress had been paid for in blood, ingenuity, and relentless adaptation. Human civilization was not the product of comfort, it was the product of pressure. And now that pressure came from the stars. The rulers expected fear, they expected capitulation, they expected fractured responses from competing governments and corporations. They expected humanity to do what countless others had done before, look up at impossible power and kneel. Instead, humanity did something else. Humanity listened. Every sensor, every telescope, every quantum array drank in data. The alien fleets did not hide their superiority. They saw no need. Their ships broadcast gravitational signatures that bent space like sculpted art. Their energy emissions were orders of magnitude beyond anything human engineers had achieved. Their formations were mathematically perfect, arranged in fractal patterns that optimized control over entire solar systems. The rulers believed that overwhelming force ended resistance before it began. Human analysts saw something different. They saw consistency. They saw predictability. They saw doctrines frozen by success. The rulers' fleets moved like monum. NTS, not hunters. They advanced in formations designed to intimidate lesser minds. They positioned command vessels at the center, protected by layers of escorts, trusting in shields that had never failed against younger species. Their technology was ancient and refined, but it was also standardized, optimized for stability rather than experimentation. Humanity, by contrast, had never standardized anything for long. Within hours of the ultimatum, Earth's orbit became a storm of activity. Fleets that had never been intended for war were refitted on the fly. Cargo ships were stripped and reinforced. Mining vessels were armed. Research platforms were repurposed into sensor nets. Civilian AIs were given military authority. Jurisdictional arguments vanished under the weight of extinction-level urgency. For the first time in human history, there was no debate about unity. There was only resolve. The rulers issued compliance timelines measured in planetary cycles. They believed this generous. They had forgotten what desperation could do to a species that had survived by improvisation. While the rulers waited for surrender, humanity worked without sleep. Factories ran until their structures glowed. Engineers ignored safety margins that had once been sacred. Experimental weapons that had never passed ethics committees were deployed because there was no longer an ethics committee to say no. Humanity's greatest strength emerged not as raw power, but as speed of adaptation. The rulers noticed the activity and interpreted it as panic. They were wrong. The first clash occurred at the edge of the Kuiper Belt, where a human task force made up of mismatched hulls and incompatible systems drifted into the path of an advancing ruler reconnaissance armada. From a distance, the engagement looked absurd. Tiny, angular human ships against colossal alien constructs that dwarfed moons. The rulers expected annihilation within minutes. Instead, the battlefield detonated into chaos. Human vessels did not engage in traditional formations. They scattered, accelerated unpredictably, and flooded space with noise. Electromagnetic interference, debris clouds, decoy signatures, and gravitational distortions turned the clean geometry of the rulers' advance into a mess of false targets. Human weapons did not focus on shields or hulls. They targeted sensors, communication relays, and formation cohesion. The rulers' ships were powerful, but they were accustomed to fighting opponents who played by the same rules. Humanity had never played fair. Kinetic weapons accelerated beyond theoretical limits. Drone swarms sacrificed themselves to map shield frequencies in real time. Experimental AI pilots pushed reaction times beyond what organic crews could survive. The engagement did not end in victory, but it did not end in annihilation either. It ended in something far more dangerous. It ended in proof. Proof that the rulers could bleed. The loss of even a single reconnaissance vessel sent shockwaves through the ancient council. That ship had survived wars that predated human agriculture. Its destruction by a species that had barely left its cradle was unthinkable. For the first time in millennia, the rulers revised their assessment. Humanity was no longer merely disruptive. Humanity was anomalous. The response was swift and merciless. The rulers escalated, deploying enforcement fleets designed to erase resistance rather than suppress it. Entire human colonies vanished under orbital bombardment. Habitats were cracked open and vented into vacuum. Population centers were reduced to glowing scars visible from orbit. The rulers believed this demonstration would break humanity's will. Instead, it forged something darker and stronger. Every destroyed colony became a rallying point. Every massacre became a lesson. Human commanders studied the attacks, identifying patterns in energy output, targeting priorities, and logistical chains. The rulers struck with precision, but precision required predictability. Predictability could be exploited. Humanity began to fight not for territory, but for time. Every delaying action, every sacrificial stand, bought hours for engineers to refine weapons and strategists to rewrite doctrines. The rulers were winning battles, but they were losing control of the narrative. Humanity did not collapse. Humanity adapted faster with every loss. On Earth, cities went dark as power was diverted to planetary defenses. The sky glowed with the constant movement of ships and platforms. People watched silently, knowing that the universe had finally noticed them and decided they should not exist. They refused to accept that verdict. The rulers, confident in their ancient authority, prepared the final phase of enforcement, the eradication of Earth itself. The symbolic destruction of humanity's birthplace would serve as a warning to every other emergent species that dared to rise without permission. The fleets converged, casting shadows across the solar system. They believed the end was inevitable. They did not yet understand that by challenging humanity directly, by striking its home and its people, they had activated something far more dangerous than any weapon. They had given humanity a singular purpose. And humanity, when given no other option, had always been at its most terrifying. The galaxy held its breath as the rulers raised their crowns over Earth. Unaware that those crowns were already beginning to crack, the rulers believed that power was measured by mass, by energy output, by the sheer number of stars that bent beneath their banners. Their doctrine had been forged across epochs where resistance meant extinction, where younger species shattered long before adaptation could take root. They had never needed to understand their enemies deeply. Fear had always been enough. Humanity rewrote that equation. As the enforcement fleets tightened their grip on the solar system, human strategy shifted from reaction to intention. This was no longer about survival alone. This was about understanding the enemy so completely that inevitability itself could be turned inside out. Every battle, every loss, every shattered habitat was harvested for data. Humanity treated war the same way it had treated nature, disease, and the vacuum of space, as a problem to be solved through relentless iteration. The rulers struck with overwhelming force, but their force followed rules. Their weapons relied on energy projection refined to perfection, their shields calibrated against known threats, their command structures centralized for efficiency. They believed that control flowed from the top down, that authority stabilized chaos. Humanity understood chaos intimately. Human fleets began to fracture intentionally. Instead of unified armadas, they deployed autonomous cells operating with incomplete information, bound together not by rigid command, but by adaptive objectives. If one cell was destroyed, others learned instantly. If a tactic failed, it was discarded without hesitation. There was no pride in doctrine, no reverence for tradition. Only results mattered. The rulers attempted decapitation strikes, targeting Earth's political centers, its industrial hubs, its data nexuses. They discovered too late that humanity had already dispersed its leadership. Governments dissolved into distributed councils. Military command became algorithmic, fluid, and resilient. There was no single head to cut off. Every human loss was personal, but humanity had learned long ago how to keep functioning while grieving. The battles escalated beyond the solar system. Human forces lured ruler fleets into asteroid fields seeded with sensor-masking alloys. They baited pursuit through unstable gravitational zones near gas giants. They turned the very physics of space into a weapon, exploiting relativistic effects that the rulers had long dismissed as inefficient or unnecessary. Human engineers pushed their ships beyond safe operational thresholds, accepting casualties that would have horrified the rulers. To humanity, sacrifice was not waste, it was investment. The rulers began to notice something deeply unsettling. Human vessels did not retreat when damaged. They advanced. Ships missing entire sections still accelerated toward targets. Crews rerouted life support manually, sealing off compartments with improvised barriers. Artificial intelligences, originally designed for logistics and research, rewrote their own code mid-battle to optimize combat performance. Humanity treated machines not as tools, but as partners, extensions of their own desperation and creativity. The rulers had never allowed such autonomy. Their machines were obedient. Humanity's machines were feral. As engagements multiplied, ruler commanders found their predictive models failing. Human tactics evolved faster than simulations could update. What worked in one encounter failed catastrophically in the next. Patterns dissolved. The ancient confidence that had guided the rulers for millennia began to erode. And beneath the surface of every battle, humanity was preparing something far larger. On worlds far from the front lines, in hidden shipyards buried beneath ice and rock, humanity worked on weapons that did not exist in any ruler archive. They exploited theoretical physics once considered impractical. They embraced instability as a feature rather than a flaw. Where ruler technology sought equilibrium, human technology chased thresholds. One such threshold was information warfare. Humanity realized that the rulers' greatest strength, their interconnected command lattice, was also their greatest vulnerability. The rulers communicated through channels that assumed shared assumptions, shared logic, shared priorities. Humanity introduced noise not by attacking those channels directly, but by contaminating the data itself. False victories were broadcast, phantom fleets appeared and vanished. Sensor ghosts mimicked human signatures perfectly. Entire ruler task forces diverted to engage enemies that did not exist, wasting time and resources chasing mirages crafted by human code that evolved faster than ruler countermeasures. The rulers began to argue internally, something they had not done in ages. Consensus fractured. Old hierarchies clashed with new realities. Some advocated annihilation at any cost. Others warned that total destruction of humanity might destabilize the region, draw attention from rival powers, or expose weaknesses. Humanity listened. Human intelligence operations did not merely intercept ruler communications. They studied them, learning the rhythms of ancient minds, the psychological weight of immortality, the fear of change that came with having ruled too long. Humanity understood something critical. The rulers were not afraid of defeat. They were afraid of precedent. If humanity survived, others would follow. That realization hardened the conflict into something existential on both sides. The rulers escalated again, unveiling weapons that collapsed orbitals into planetary surfaces, that boiled oceans from space, that stripped atmospheres with surgical precision. Earth itself endured multiple extinction-level assaults, its magnetosphere flaring under unimaginable stress. Billions died. Humanity did not surrender. Instead, something unprecedented happened. Humanity counterattacked, not with fleets alone, but with audacity. A coalition strike penetrated deep into ruler-controlled space, targeting not military installations, but symbols. Ancient monuments, energy nexuses considered untouchable, worlds that had not known war for tens of millions of years. Humanity demonstrated reach not through numbers, but through unpredictability. The message was unmistakable. The rulers were not safe. For the first time since their ascension, the ancient powers felt vulnerability not as an abstract concept, but as a lived experience. Their citizens, long insulated from conflict, watched their skies burn. Panic rippled through societies that had forgotten how to endure fear. Humanity had brought the war home. And in doing so, humanity forced the rulers into a strategic dilemma they had never faced. Total annihilation of humanity would require resources that left their own cores exposed. Continued suppression risked further escalation and internal collapse. Negotiation was unthinkable, as it would legitimize humanity's defiance. The rulers hesitated. Humanity exploited that hesitation mercilessly. New human weapons entered the field, devices that manipulated spacetime at localized scales, tearing open microsingularities that shredded ruler ships from within. These weapons were unstable, dangerous even to their users, but they worked. Human crews accepted that risk without question. Victory was no longer theoretical. It was visible. Across the galaxy, younger species watched silently as the impossible unfolded. The rulers who had dominated for epochs were being challenged not by equal power, but by superior adaptability. Humanity did not outgun the rulers. Humanity outthought them. The war reached a breaking point near Earth, where the rulers committed their largest fleet yet, a force intended to end the conflict decisively. Thousands of ships moved in perfect formation, a display of ancient supremacy aimed at crushing the last resistance. Humanity met them with everything it had. The battle tore the solar system apart. Planets shifted in their orbits, moons shattered. Space itself seemed to scream under the strain of weapons that bent reality. Human losses were staggering. Entire fleets vanished in seconds. But the rulers' fleet faltered. Human attacks targeted not hulls, but coordination. Command vessels vanished in cascading failures. Shield harmonics collapsed under adaptive frequencies. The perfect formation disintegrated into isolated clusters, each suddenly vulnerable. For the first time, a ruler flagship exploded in full view of Earth. The shockwave was not just physical. It was psychological. Across ruler space, the unthinkable became undeniable. The rulers could lose. And humanity, battered, bloodied, and burning, was still advancing. The war was no longer about suppression. It was about survival on both sides. And the galaxy understood that whatever happened next would redefine power forever. The collapse of the ruler flagship near Earth did more than shatter a fleet. It shattered an assumption older than most stars in the spiral arms. The idea that the ancient powers were inevitable, immutable, and eternal had been the foundation of galactic order for longer than recorded memory. Entire civilizations had been shaped around that belief. Entire species had evolved beneath its shadow. Now that shadow flickered. In the wake of that battle, the galaxy entered a state of stunned suspension. Trade routes stalled. Neutral systems went. Silent, observation arrays across thousands of light years pivoted toward human space, not out of curiosity, but out of fear and something dangerously close to hope. Humanity had not merely survived. Humanity had forced the rulers into a war of uncertainty. The rulers responded with what they had always relied on when challenged: escalation through scale. Entire reserve armadas were awakened from stasis. fleets that had not moved since the extinction of species now lost even to ruler records. Planetary forges that had been dormant for millennia roared back to life. The rulers prepared to drown humanity in sheer mass, believing that adaptability had limits, that numbers could still crush ingenuity. They underestimated how far humanity had already gone. By this stage of the war, human society no longer resembled the fractured civilization that had first reached the stars. Earth was scarred, its oceans partially boiled, its continents reshaped by bombardment. Mars was a fortress of iron and resolve. The belt had become a mobile industrial engine, entire habitats fused into drifting shipyards that followed the front lines. Humanity had become a war civilization not by choice, but by necessity. Children were taught orbital mechanics before geography. Engineers were revered like warriors once had been. Every citizen understood that survival was a collective act. There was no illusion that someone else would save them. That understanding gave humanity an edge no ruler civilization possessed. The rulers' societies were ancient, stratified, and complacent. Their citizens had lived under absolute security for so long that the concept of existential threat was almost theoretical. When human raids struck deep into ruler space, panic spread faster than any physical damage. Entire systems rebelled against their own overseers, demanding protection that the rulers could no longer guarantee. The war had cracked open something far more dangerous than military vulnerability. It had exposed political rot. Human intelligence networks exploited this relentlessly. Data leaks flooded ruler populations with suppressed histories of annihilated species and broken promises. The myth of benevolent stewardship collapsed under the weight of undeniable evidence. The rulers' authority, once unquestioned, now required force to maintain. Force stretched thin. Meanwhile, on the front lines, humanity unveiled the culmination of everything it had learned since the first ultimatum. A new doctrine that abandoned the idea of decisive battles entirely. Humanity no longer sought to destroy fleets outright. It sought to exhaust, destabilize, and isolate. Human forces targeted supply chains that spanned light years. Energy harvesting stars were sabotaged. Manufacturing nodes were infiltrated by self-evolving code that subtly altered tolerances, causing catastrophic failures months later. The rulers began losing ships not in battle, but to cascading logistical collapse. This kind of warfare horrified the rulers. It violated every principle of honorable conflict they had codified across epochs. To humanity, it was simply survival scaled to a galactic level. Humans had always fought ecosystems, scarcity, and entropy. This was no different. As ruler fleets advanced, they found themselves arriving late, underpowered, or unsupported. Entire armadas stalled in interstellar space, stranded by the failure of systems they had trusted implicitly. Human strike groups appeared and vanished, never lingering long enough for retaliation. The rulers' advantage in raw power became meaningless without cohesion. The war's center of gravity shifted again when humanity took its greatest risk. A direct strike on the Axis thrones. These were not merely political centers, they were the symbolic and infrastructural heart of ruler dominance. Massive constructs anchored in artificial gravity wells, housing the collective governance intelligences and the oldest surviving members of the ruling species. No enemy had ever reached them. No one had ever dared. Humanity dared. The operation was suicidal by conventional standards. A coalition of human fleets, supported by experimental spacetime drives that tore ships apart if miscalculated, plunged deep into the most heavily defended region of known space. Casualties were immediate and horrific. Ships disintegrated under defensive fire that could crack planets. The survivors pressed on. Human tactics reached a level of controlled madness that defied ruler comprehension. Fleets fragmented into microelements, each with independent objectives. Decays outnumbered real ships 10 to 1. Reality itself was distorted as human weapons collapsed local spacetime, creating blind zones where ruler sensors failed entirely. For the first time, the rulers fought blind. The Axis thrones burned. Not completely, not yet, but enough. Human strikes severed critical data conduits, corrupted ancient archives, and destabilized gravitational anchors that held the constructs in place. Entire segments of ruler governance were lost in cascading failures, decision-making slowed, consensus fractured further. The rulers had built a civilization that relied on perfect control. Humanity introduced imperfection. The psychological impact was devastating. Across ruler space, confidence collapsed. Fleets began retreating without orders. Commanders hesitated, uncertain whether their superiors even still existed. The ancient certainty that had guided them through countless wars evaporated. Humanity seized the initiative. What followed was not a single climactic battle, but 1,000 smaller collapses. Ruler territories began to fragment. Subjugated species revolted openly, inspired by humanity's defiance. Human advisors and technology flowed quietly into these uprisings, amplifying their effectiveness without claiming credit. The galaxy ignited. The rulers found themselves fighting on dozens of fronts, their once unassailable dominance eroded by internal dissent and external pressure. Every attempt to reassert control drained resources they no longer had. Every act of brutality only fueled further resistance. Humanity, battered but unbroken, stood at the center of the storm. Yet victory was not assured. The rulers still possessed weapons capable of sterilizing entire regions of space. In their desperation, they began preparing final contingency measures, protocols designed to erase threats so thoroughly that nothing could ever rise again in their place. The galaxy itself would suffer, but the rulers would endure. Human intelligence uncovered fragments of these plans. What they revealed chilled even the most hardened strategists. The rulers were willing to collapse stars, to destabilize galactic arms, to trigger chain reactions that would wipe out countless civilizations, just to prevent the idea of defiance from surviving. Humanity faced its darkest hour. The war had escalated beyond survival. It had become a battle for the future of intelligent life. Humanity made its choice without hesitation. If the rulers intended to burn the galaxy to maintain their thrones, then those thrones would have to fall completely. There could be no half measures, no compromises. Humanity prepared for the final phase, one that would decide not just who ruled, but whether ruling itself would remain the organizing principle of the stars. As fleets repositioned and weapons charged, the galaxy held its breath once more. Because it had become clear to all who watched that the ancient rulers were no longer the authors of destiny. Humanity was. By the time the final phase began, the galaxy no longer resembled the ordered expanse the rulers had once governed with effortless authority. Space itself felt wounded. Star lanes flickered with debris and wreckage. Entire regions went dark, not from destruction alone, but from silence. Communications severed, networks collapsed, civilizations holding their breath in fear of what would come next. Humanity stood at the center of that silence. Not as conquerors in the traditional sense, not as an empire crowned by ancient bloodlines or immortal councils, but as something far more unsettling. Humanity stood as proof that inevitability could be broken, that history did not belong solely to those who arrived first. The rulers prepared their final contingency. It was a plan born of desperation and arrogance intertwined, a weapon not aimed at fleets or planets, but at the structure of the galaxy itself. Stellar destabilizers were positioned near key fusion nodes, stars whose collapse would ripple gravitational chaos across entire regions. The resulting chain reactions would sterilize systems, fracture trade networks, and erase the possibility of organized resistance for millions of years. The rulers would survive in isolated sanctuaries. Everyone else would burn. They called it preservation. Humanity recognized it for what it was, extinction elevated to policy. The discovery of this plan unified humanity in a way nothing else had. There was no longer debate about cost, ethics, or survival odds. This was not a war for dominance. It was a war to prevent the galaxy from becoming a graveyard curated by ancient fear. Human strategy shifted one final time. There would be no drawn-out campaigns, no incremental pressure. Humanity would strike everywhere, all at once, faster than the rulers could react. It was a gamble on a scale that dwarfed every risk humanity had ever taken before. Every remaining human ship was committed. Every experimental weapon was deployed. Every boundary between civilian and military vanished completely. Humanity transformed itself into a single, coordinated act of defiance. The opening moments of the final phase were chaos incarnate. Human fleets emerged from folded space inside ruler territory at thousands of points simultaneously. Some ships did not survive the transition. Others arrived partially fused with spacetime distortions. None turned back. Targets were precise. Stellar destabilizers were attacked not with brute force, but with surgical disruption. Human weapons injected chaotic variables into their control systems, forcing safety interlocks to trigger emergency shutdowns. Others collapsed local spacetime just enough to shift stellar alignment, rendering the devices useless without detonating the stars themselves. Where that failed, humanity accepted the unthinkable. Human ships rammed the devices directly. Entire crews died in blinding flashes of energy, trading their lives to save systems they would never see. Those sacrifices were not broadcast as propaganda. They were simply recorded, archived, and used to refine the next strike. The rulers attempted to respond with overwhelming force, but their reaction lagged behind reality. Their command structure, already fractured, could not process the scale of the assault. Fleets received contradictory orders. Some never received orders at all. Humanity had learned how to move faster than authority. At the same time, the final assault on the Axis thrones resumed. This time, there was no intention of retreat. Humanity brought weapons designed not to destroy the thrones outright, but to unravel them. Gravitational anchors were destabilized. Artificial singularities were forced into resonance. Ancient structures that had survived supernovae began to tear themselves apart under stresses they were never designed to endure. The Axis thrones began to fall. Not in a single explosion, but in a slow, horrifying collapse visible across light years. Entire segments vanished into warped space. Governance intelligences fractured, their once unified processing dissolving into incoherent fragments. The oldest rulers, beings who had never known fear, experienced it in its purest form. They were no longer eternal. They were no longer in control. Across the galaxy, ruler fleets faltered as the symbolic heart of their power disintegrated. Some surrendered, others fled. A few fought to the last, clinging to doctrines that had already failed them. Humanity did not pursue annihilation. That choice surprised everyone. Instead, humanity issued a declaration broadcast across every reachable system, not a demand for submission, not a claim of dominion. It was a statement of boundaries and warning. No species would rule the galaxy unchallenged again. No authority would be allowed to erase civilizations for convenience. Power would no longer flow from age alone. The war ended not with a coronation, but with exhaustion. The rulers' contingency failed. Their thrones were shattered. Their fleets were scattered or destroyed. Their myth was dead. What remained of their civilizations retreated inward, isolated, forced to confront a universe that no longer feared them. Humanity paid a terrible price. Earth was scarred beyond recognition. Entire ecosystems were gone forever. Human population numbers had been reduced catastrophically. Countless cultures, languages, and histories vanished in the fires of the war. Humanity did not emerge unbroken. But humanity endured. In the aftermath, the galaxy entered an age of uncertainty unlike anything before. Without rulers enforcing order through fear, power decentralized. Alliances formed and dissolved. New conflicts erupted, but so did unprecedented cooperation. Species once silenced began to speak, to explore, to build without asking permission. Humanity did not become galactic overlords. Humanity became something far more dangerous. A precedent. The species that proved the ancient order could fall. The species that reminded the galaxy that adaptability could overcome immortality, that courage could rival millennia of dominance, that desperation could forge brilliance. Where human ships traveled, they were watched carefully, some with gratitude, some with suspicion, some with fear. Humanity accepted all of it. They had learned that being feared was sometimes the cost of survival. Yet they also carried scars that tempered their power. Humanity did not forget the billions lost. They did not forget how close the galaxy came to annihilation. Those memories shaped their future more than any victory ever could. In the ruins of the Axis thrones, drifting monuments to fallen arrogance, humanity established observatories instead of fortresses, not to rule, but to watch, to ensure that no power ever again believed itself untouchable. The galaxy had changed forever, and at its core was a simple, terrifying truth now etched into the shared consciousness of every starfaring civilization. Humanity was not special because it was strongest. Humanity was special because it refused to accept extinction as destiny. The rulers had challenged humanity, expecting obedience. They had brought their own destruction instead. And the galaxy would spend the rest of its history living with that consequence.